All right, people, we're back. It's the midpoint already, somehow. We're at the halfway point of this show. Season 3, Episode 5, entitled Retired Janitors of Idaho. And things are heating up as the Roys hit the, biannual shareholders meeting. The fate of the company is quite literally on the precipice as the Roys struggle in order to attempt to come to some term of deal of understanding with Sandy and Stewy. Dustin, you got any thoughts before we get this started?
Dude, I feel like we're like amateurs right now because we're not even wearing ties.
Oh, man. All of that and more. Stay tuned. I mean, look at it this way. We're kind of having our own shareholders meeting because who really cares, honestly, about all those formal people and their money and constantly keeping it away for the rest of us? What's going on, people? It's the Succession recap show, season 3, episode 5. We're talking about that gangbusters midpoint episode, Retired Janitors of Idaho, which is named after a phrase that Roman just randomly drops. What is he talking about? What is he talking about? He's talking about their minority what's it called, their minority shareholders or something like
Yeah,
that,
yeah.
which is kind of crazy just in general. But this is an episode that kind of, we've been talking all season about like who's gonna pick what side, how the sides are gonna line up, how the conflict's gonna go, and this is kind of showing. Last week it seemed like Kendall was gonna have a little bit of an edge, but slowly but surely throughout it seemed that things just, again, Logan just has the luck of the devil on his side. Just things seem to constantly just line up on his side because the Roys are struggling this entire episode in order to try and find like some sort of an edge, some sort of a loophole. Kendall like takes a little bit of a backseat in order to like engineer, some machinations behind the scene in order to continue to strong arm the company from them. Greg is at a little bit of a crossroads. Some weird things are revealed about Tom. It all kind of culminates in this one major event that kind of shows that at the end of the day, Kendall may be losing his grip. Logan is not at all physically or mentally there, but still has a an iron grip that cannot be broken. Dustin, what were some of your thoughts after just watching this episode in general? Like, as far as like how it solidifies where the season seems to be going.
Yeah, I still like all the other episodes, Dominic. I'm sorry if I sound like a broken record, but I still don't know where this is going to end up going. And that's nothing but great, in my opinion. Like, I just love how unpredictable this show just continues to be. And you think it's going to go one way, and then Kendall goes on stage and then starts reading off all the names of the victims. So it's like, I don't know what the fuck is going on anymore, but it's just so entertaining. And this episode ruled, and it's definitely one of the strongest we've gotten so far this season.
A lot of people that I've been hearing have already started because, of course, the show's in its 3rd season now. So this is, of course, when the haters, when the critiques, when the hot takes are going to start coming. People are already starting to accuse this show of kind of being a rinse and repeat, where it's like, oh, Kendall seems to be sliding back into his season 1 shoes. Logan is back on like the sick train where he's got this strange illness, only this time it's actually explained before he ultimately, kind of rests and resets. And the one thing that I can say is that, look, if the writing and the show continues to be as entertaining as it is, whatever, keep it coming, because I could watch this shit all day long. This is one of those episodes of television that I was just locked in from the moment that it started. It was really late at night. I remember too, it was like midnight or 1 o'clock, something like that, well past my bedtime. And I was locked in the entire time. I couldn't look away. Ultimately, just the amount of tension that continues to be generated purely by the dialogue, by the interactions, by the arguments, by the vast amounts of just big word, crazy insult drops by these characters, all the backroom crazy political dealings, all of the incompetence. It's funny. I've also heard that this episode was kind of compared to a Marx Brothers sketch where it's like all the characters, like nobody knows what the hell is going on. Ultimately, Logan is barking complete and utter nonsense that, again, just because of the sheer fact that he's Logan Roy, everyone still kind of takes as the word of God ultimately. And in this episode, it's revealed that Logan has a UTI of all things, which I'm like, okay, was that sort of kind of hinted at in the first episode where we're literally introduced to him pissing on a wall? Also, I love that they literally coined the term piss mad in this. I don't even remember when the last time that was used in the actual like pop culture lexicon, but like, I don't know. what are your thoughts just on Logan's like physical state? Because this seems to be a thing that the show literally will just use and weaponize in order to like, oh, we need a little bit of extra tension here. Oh
Yeah.
no, Logan's on the brink of death again.
That's a fair criticism. If you were to put it that way. But yeah, the way he keeps deteriorating, I think it happens the more he's under stress. And I think the second season we didn't see him in that state because he wasn't under stress, because he was in control of everyone and everything. He got control of Kendall in the last season, and now Kendall flipped it on him, and now he's gone piss mad. So he's definitely he has had this fucking UTI for definitely since the start of this series. So the fact that he gets more and more and more and more mad and and just like psychotic and just like nonsensical, it's just so more entertaining for us the viewer, because it's just great, even though it is just also you can just feel the tension just raising in every second, and just the fear in everyone's faces. You could just it's so palpable.
Yeah, it definitely seems like this is something that they'll use in order to like continue with what's it called? It's let's say it certainly explains for a lot of the characters like kind of decisions and questions and decision making just in general, because it's you could almost one could almost make the assumption that every time Logan like maybe barks or has like an irrational reaction to one of his kids, like could that be some of the illness poking through? Like could he have a like a momentary lapse, or is that just Logan's typical prickly personality? Because the thing that's also established this episode once again, is that this already hasn't been established enough, is that Logan is perfectly willing to help you have power until you actually have power. And then when you've actually made a move, that's when he pulls back and is like, oh, you're a threat. He obviously proved that with Kendall this season, and now he proved that with Shiv in this episode, ultimately, when, ironically enough, after seemingly a couple of episodes of just tripping over her feet and not being sure what to do, Shiv seemingly kind of salvages the situation with Sandy. What's it called? Sandy the younger, I should say. The Hope Davis character, obviously portrayed with her father, and in this case, I'm guessing New York beloved New York stage actor Larry Pine being in critical condition for some sort of illness. Ultimately, we see them at the Waystar Royco shareholders meeting, where they are attempting to stave off where they are attempting to stave off a company vote, which they know, if spearheaded by Josh Aronson, will officially lose them the company. Ultimately, I'm not quite sure the logistics of that or how that works specifically, because I don't know like company insiders there, but just based on like just the way how everyone is acting, I can assume that that's something that's pretty bad just in general. Because I feel like when it comes to like all of like the Succession, like not background player, but like secondary character, like kind of over stress acting, where they're trying to talk around like the fact that they could literally lose their jobs any second, like quality stress acting. I'm going to call it this episode, from Peter Freeman as Frank, David Rash as Carl,
Yes.
J. Smith Cameron as Jerry, all around. Like, but in particular, like, I thought that like this was a high point for all three of those characters, like especially the point where Frank is kind of thrown out on stage and has to literally filibuster his way through an entire room.
Vamp.
It's amazing. Calls Carl out on stage. Carl's like, I can't do this. You got to keep vamping for another 10 minutes. And there's just a bunch of guys just sitting there on stage just behind him. I can only imagine what it would have been like to have been in that peanut gallery, just being like, what is this guy doing? Like,
yeah. I did feel bad for Frank this episode, especially when like he brings Jerry out on stage, which at that point it feels like he's been on stage for like 45 minutes or an hour. So, or maybe more. So, like, by the time he brings Jerry on stage, and she's like, "You fucking cowardly prick," yeah, I feel bad for him. It's like, come on, why can't anybody else have a turn? Like, why does he have to be the default like cuck and vamp?
And then Jerry's on for 5 seconds, and they start playing the video.
Yeah, exactly. Right? But like, why couldn't he do that? Why couldn't he like introduce the video?
Just introduce the video. If they needed to fill time. It's easy. But ultimately, it is of course overcomplicated by Kendall's machinations behind the scenes, by attempting to have Stewy reach out for by meeting with Stewy and attempting to have him reach out for a deal. Very similar to what they tried to do last season in Greece, where Stewy just flat out denied them. Here's what confused me about this, right? So it's got to be Sandy's physical state, just in general, that causes the change in heart in Stewy. Because the whole thing is that last season, Stewy was just flat out rejecting Kendall and Logan. But now this season, what? Because Kendall now is against Logan again. Now, all of a sudden, Stewy's going to be perfectly okay for, what's it called? For what's it called for the payout for the stand down, whatever, for the
Mhm,
surrender, and
mhm.
the terms is, oh, they got to get rid of the private jets. Like, what is
Yeah.
going on here, just in general? Like, what is this motivation? Is he just sick of this deal? Like, are they where was this whole situation just to leverage more power on the board? Like, what the hell was the point of all this then? If it feels
I
like this is what it
mean,
was building to.
maybe it was to like leverage more power on the board, but ultimately it's just it's Larry Pine fucking with Brian Cox. You know what I mean? Like it's just like they have such a bitter rivalry, and the last two seasons have proved this too. Like at any point when you think they're gonna have like an agreement, no. Yeah, something bad happens, and not even if it's Kendall's fault. Like, like everyone just always backstabs each other, especially those two. So it's like just something I've come to like, I'm frustrated with it, but I've come to like just accept it because there's plenty of shit we don't know about that past partnership
Right,
or relationship between those two. So,
right.
uh, but yeah, they don't give a shit about the private jets or whatever, the PJs as the characters
The
say in this episode.
PJs.
That was funny. But like, yeah, they don't give a shit. Like Larry Pine don't give a shit about the private. He's just fucking with them. He
Yeah.
just wants to like just take advantage of them. Just
Exactly. It's just
yeah.
old rich guys just messing around with each other because they have nothing else better to do. Ultimately, is what it comes down to. But I don't know. Stewie's position within this is still really fascinating to me because we've had. It feels like in comparison to the first season, it feels like we've had so little time to spend with Stewy because even though he was upgraded to main cast member last season, we got what, like 2-3 episodes maybe with Stewy in general.
Mhm.
Like he wasn't in the last episode at all. I
Yeah.
don't think. And this season, he's been downgraded to like guest recurring status, and he's been in 2 episodes. And the first and the only instance we saw him beforehand was him hearing Kendall's proposal, where Kendall once again gave kind of like a nothing answer other than just back me, please. That way it'll help. It'll help you, backstab your rival ultimately. And like Kendall
Mhm.
even knows that the only appeal for them is the fact that, what's it called? Sandy wants to take down Logan. But Stewie's position in this, I'm like, because I constantly keep asking myself, like, what does Stewy get out of this? Is Stewy the latest in this line of characters that just wants to backstab Kendall? But if that's the case, like, how is taking down Logan going to be beneficial? Going to be anything but beneficial for Kendall ultimately? Like, is this from a smart, savvy business sense? Because Stewy doesn't strike me as a character that has been brought on screen in order to execute anything because it seems to be the smart business move. But he also seems to be like too smart and too ambitious for his own good to let somebody like Sandy like push his buttons. Like, I don't know. Like, what's your take on Stewie's whole thing? Like, do you think that Stewie's just another character that's just written like Greg, that's kind of just written in there for the humor and for the punchline at this point? Because I feel like if so, there's too many of those guys at this point.
I agree with you there, where it's just like, yeah, that could be part of it. But here's the thing that's always bothered me about Stewy. I don't understand what that character even is. Okay, he's Kendall's like college friend, but then at every chance he gets, like he's the one who fucking backstabs him first by bringing Sandy in. All right, Kendall didn't. It was like bamboozled by that. So at every like I just don't. And what does he even do for a living? Is he just an investor? Is he just a vague businessman? Like what does he do? What does he do? All right, like other than just like, and I don't even know if he's really that smart. He's smart in like a general sense, but business sense, I really don't understand his game either. And that for that reason, that's why he's like the third most irritating character on this series. But and I don't even think that performance is even that good. All he has to do, that actor, is just be an asshole and just say quippy things. And I feel like plenty of actors could do that. But here's the thing, and he's going to be in Spider-Man being a dick to Tom Holland, so that might be funny. I don't know. But and his
Advertising to the Marvel fans, be like, "Hey, Marvel fans, come watch Succession every Sunday night.
Stewie.
Every Sunday night, 8 at 9 p.m. on HBO
Yeah,
Max."
easily the worst Stewie in pop culture. Like, but
Has there been a better one? Has there
uh
been any others?
Stewie Griffin, you
Oh,
goofy fuck.
duh, duh. All right, that one's on me. That one's on me.
Yeah, easily. And yeah, I mean there's no other Stewies, but yeah, I never understood what he even is. Like he's like presumably
According to the
his
Wikipedia
asshole
profile,
friend,
he's
but
a
like that
private equity investor, is what
okay.
he is.
Yeah, whatever the fuck that means.
It means you have a lot of money and you just invest in other companies in order to try and make more
Privately.
money. Exactly. Yeah, it basically gives him a lot of autonomy, which again, I'm like, if he's got his own money, why does he
Yeah.
need to throw it in with Sandy ultimately? Like, was it just to gain the seats on Waystar? Because that's what it seems like. But at this point, it almost seems like Waystar is almost too much of a headache for him just in general. I don't know. Something strangely tells me that Stewy doesn't seem to be a character with really a lot of long-term appeal on this show. But let's talk about the Roys for a second. Let's talk about each of them. Let's talk about like what the kind of their game plan is, their positioning is. First off, we already talked a little bit about Logan. So Kendall in this episode, for me, this is kind of the solidifier that Kendall is going to be at least on the losing side, at least unless he could pull something out of it, unless he could pull something out of his ass. Because even though he's still on like kind of like, let's call it like crackhead Kendall energy, you could just feel like kind of the autonomy just slipping from him as the episode goes on. First, when he has to approach Stewy, and it almost seems like some of the old like kind of begging Kendall is having to come out a little bit. Then obviously with the conversation with his kids and about the stupid rabbit. And at first he's like, "Huh, I'm rich. You can listen to me. You can do whatever you can do whatever you want. If the rabbit wants bagel, give it bagel." And then at the end, it turns out it's like, "Oh, the rabbit has got sick because you fed it the bagel." And it's like,
That was
"Send it
the
to my
dumbest part
doctor."
of this
It's so
episode.
dumb. So
That
fucking dumb. And then obviously, like the one awesome moment, two, but the one awesome moment that he has when obviously he's like, what is going on with everyone kind of running around? He goes to visit everyone else and he starts yelling at them. Like, is that the first time that we've like really heard Kendall yell? Like, I know there's been brief moments where he shouted at Logan, like when he hit Roman last season, but like I think this is like the first time that I've really heard Kendall like really raise his voice, especially in like what felt like a really tense situation.
What about episode, what was it, 2? When he was like screaming at this season, episode 2, when he was screaming at, Shiv.
That was more from like a frustration. That was more so like sarcastically mocking. I didn't necessarily think of that as like yelling. Like this one, like he had his voice raised like several actors. Like he was.
Oh
like,
yeah,
mad.
it was more so, but like I want to see more of that because like I love that passion, and everyone else is just dismissing him. Kira Kulk is just like, this man's a fucking idiot. Like,
yeah,
like that was a cool little moment. But like just seeing Jeremy Strong's reaction to Brian Cox being piss mad, that was just priceless.
that was awesome. I loved that.
It's like, what is going on?
Yeah.
What is wrong with him?
And then he sees that and he's like, "Are you fucking kidding me?" I love that. I'm like, I have been waiting for Kendall to say that since the start of the show. Again, it just revealed between that moment and then obviously when he comes out on stage later on in order to like try to do like, the what's it called, the surprise move for like the social media gifts in general.
Me too.
It ultimately shows Kendall's biggest flaw, which is that he has got all of the right instincts, but because of his ego, he just consistently makes the wrong moves ultimately between his ego and his insecurity complex. Because again, his advisors tell them, they're like, look, this is, even though the Roys managed to salvage the situation, this has already kind of been a lot of a clusterfuck behind the scenes. So you don't really need to do anything. And Kendall's like, nah, I need to do this in order to like continue my online presence. And ultimately, at the end of the day, Kendall is unfortunately, I think, getting all of the right amount of traction in all of the wrong ways. Where consistently move-wise, from a public perception standpoint, he has come off as nothing but a joke. None of his moves seem to have worked. His family is constantly like subverting him at every chance he gets. And now he's in a position at the end of this episode where we don't even know if he actually is going to have any real agency going forward ultimately, which kind of sucks because he started last season on such a high note. But now, between the fact that like the best move that he has this episode from a logistics standpoint is threatening to burn Greg, which I'm sorry, what does that get him at the end of the day? Because that does nothing but incriminate himself in the first place. And second of all, once again, him continuing to shit on and alienate Greg even further, really his only like Roy-related ally left in this. And then at the end, obviously, when Logan blocks the number, and it's like, wow, so now Logan isn't even willing to give him like even a little bit of a chance. Like, I don't know, like Kendall's options are not looking very bright here, unfortunately.
They aren't, but I still don't think like him going on stage made him look that awful. Like what he did, like in the eye, like especially looking at it from the point of view of like Twitter people now. Like I feel like Twitter would like kind of like that he did that. Like if we were to look at it from real life point of view. I don't think he's done yet. I think Logan blocking him at the end, that's just making us believe like, oh, maybe this is the end for Kendall. But there's 4 episodes left. this shit's about to get even more epic, okay?
True.
Kendall's not going to let this end. Like, he doesn't think he lost at the end of this episode, even with Logan fucking, blocking his number.
Right, blocking his number and dipping on him, and what's it called? Fooling him, dipping on him for that meeting.
Yeah, exactly. And that was the most petty shit on this episode was when they tell him to go up to when Patty Jenkins fucking tells him to go. I still think that girl looks like Patty Jenkins.
That was wild.
Yeah, when she tells her to go, oh yeah, go to the room, and then it's like, oh yeah, he left like a fucking child. So it's like, yeah, I don't get it, but I still think Kendall has something up his sleeve, or like I said, previous episode on here on our Succession recap on Talkin TV podcast, Logan might die.
Yeah, which would be crazy, honestly.
I really think Logan might die.
Especially because it seems like they continue to hint at that, especially this season more than anything else, between Brian Cox and interviews and with all of Logan's obviously health issues. But ultimately, that movie, the end, just showed it's like, yeah, there's a reason why all of Logan's children are so petty, because they all get it from their dad, because Logan ultimately proves to be the pettiest character of all of them. He just will not give his kids even an inch, because ultimately what that shows to him is that they have the one thing that he secretly wants them to have, but he also knows that if they do get that, then that makes them a threat to him personally, and he just can't have that. So it's this constant push pull back and forth. I'm just wondering how long the writers are going to be able to stretch it out before it just ultimately becomes irritating, just constantly seeing them brought up and down and up and down, the kind of breaking into the repetitive nature of it. I want to talk about Greg for a second before we hop on to who I thought really was the mainstay of this episode, which was Shiv, which is Greg. We've been talking about the last couple episodes where we're like, okay, Greg cannot constantly be in this like back and forth flip-flop loophole position where he just can't seem to decide on sides. And this one really called him into question. First with Kendall straight up threatening to burn him. Then with his grandpa cutting him off.
That was the best James Cromwell scene.
Easily the best
ever.
James Cromwell scene on the entire show so far.
Yes.
No freaking question. I mean, I love James Cromwell's introduction into the show originally.
Mhm.
I still think I'm hard pressed to like remember a decent amount of his scenes from season 2, but that scene in and of itself was just awesome. Where he's just
fuck
like,
your grandpa, Greg.
Still one of my favorite lines. And then he's like, oh, well, Tom, you're on speaker. It's like, you're on speakerphone. And he's just like, well, I shouldn't be. It's amazing. It's ultimately amazing. This show was the best comedy. The show is a drama, and it's better than any comedy it's funnier than any comedy possibly ever. But yeah, so Greg ultimately is left at the end in a very precarious position of suing Greenpeace, because that's who his grandpa's given all of his money to. Because apparently after him and his grandpa went and visited the lawyer, the fact that he never followed through really pissed him off. But also he does leave him with some sage sound words of advice, which is that, yeah, you do have to grow up, straighten up, and you have to choose your own path. You can't constantly have this like fallback, I'm just also wondering, it's like, wow, how is James Cromwell going to live now that all of his money is with Greenpeace? But, I'm sure he has a little bit of, I'm sure he has a little bit, of a nice little nest egg. But I don't know, like, what do you think Greg's next move after this? Especially since it's like, he seems to have been relegated back to like, Roy Cousin Fool, which is kind of disappointing, because I'm like, it seemed for a minute there that like Greg was going to have like a little something to do,
Yeah, but except like the last 4 episodes, he's just been he's been just really the idiot that he really is.
Right.
And I don't think he's going to like, people were joking about this the last couple seasons. They'll watch Greg take over the fucking Waystar company at the end. I'm like, stop. That's not happening. He hasn't even shown a morsel of intelligence this season, and he's just like bumbling. But like, yeah, he's still hilarious, and that performance is like on point. But yeah, that character is just like, just stick with Logan, okay? You're fucked either way. You're just fucked. Just stick with Logan at this point.
I just thought it was kind of funny, especially given that Greg has been, it sucked because, again, Greg has consistently to me proved himself as a character who through thick and thin was going to like be able to like kind of, worm his way through. But it kind of shows that that may have just been because he's the writer's favorite character. Yeah. And now that that's the case, it's like, oh no, they're kind of just scrambling with him and making him like the jokester and the fool ultimately. He had that strange thing that also might be developing between him and Tom, where obviously with it's been strongly hinted at by a lot of people that Tom may be secretly gay ultimately, and that may be why he'd be lusting after Greg, which I don't necessarily know how I feel, because again, it's another one of those instances where it's like, oh man, I thought that they just had like such a great back and forth rapport and creativity, like an abusive relationship, which felt like such at home, ironically enough, on the show. And now it's
I think he's bi.
definitely would be bi, if more than
I think
anything
he's
else.
bi, if anything.
I mean, just look at his reaction to freaking, when he revealed that he's tracking Shiv's ovulation cycle, which was weird to say the least. Like, if we can just talk about Tom
she
for a
was even
second.
fucking weird.
She was even
weirded
weirded
out
by that. And it doesn't
Yeah.
take, it takes a lot to weird out somebody like Shiv, ultimately, which is that part was just wild. But
yeah,
Tom,
but it was also revealing though, saying that she doesn't want to be like a regular,
right,
a typical,
like a mom.
like a mom. Like she doesn't want to just
Right.
do that. She has more potential than that. But he really just wants. I don't even know what that's about fully. I have like a little idea of what that could mean. Like he just wants some form of like he wants to make his mark in the Roy family, so he could have his own seed. Perhaps I don't know, but it's a very
Pun
seed.
intended there.
No, literally like a seed in the family, so he could maybe end up having like a good, legacy after all. In his crazy mind,
Right.
in his fucking,
Yeah.
what was it, Nero and
Nero
Sporus.
and oh my god, that was I'm still thinking back to that, because the crazy part is I missed that originally in the episode, or like I forgot about it when we were talking about it last week, and then now I remember, and then I looked up the clip and rewatched it. I'm like, oh fuck, that was a thing.
I love the moment when like he fucking like, oh yeah, the moment between him and Logan in the bathroom.
Yes.
When Logan calls him son. After his son-in-law
getting
just
more into like sort of the King Lear stuff of that, where it's like Logan is just so beyond confused because of his UTI that he starts thinking that Tom might be somebody else. But like it works strange enough for Tom, because all that Tom has wanted since he started this whole thing is to be a part of the family, a part of the clan. And this, in some strange way, even though it's coming from like a place that is very clearly, not all mentally there, it's validating for him. Ultimately, it's the validation that he's kind of been seeking. And even though he makes the joke about the scepter,
no, sorry for interrupting you, but like if he's made any progress with anybody this season, it's low-key been Logan.
Yes.
Like
100%.
after that crazy fucking altercation they had in the finale of last season.
Yeah.
Like with the chicken.
He ate his chicken.
Epic. That's more epic than anything on Game of Thrones. I don't care. But all right, I'm sorry.
Wait till you watch the Red Wedding. That's all I'm gonna say.
That's a joke. But yeah, I just love that. Like, I don't think he really does respect Logan in like, he respects him in like a superficial way. I think he's trying to manipulate him into thinking like, oh, I'll do this for you, I'll do that, and then he's helping him. He's literally looking at his dick nonchalantly, helping him in the bathroom, and he's like, in his mind, he's probably like, what am I doing? But the way he's presenting himself, he's like, oh, what's the problem, Pop? What's the matter? I can help you. Don't worry about it. Oh, don't worry about it. And he's like, thanks, son. And just the gratification he has in his eyes is just like telling, where it's just like, oh, this crazy plan of mine might be working. And even though I don't know what that plan is specifically, I feel like we're getting little pieces of it every episode.
Right.
And I can't wait to see how that concludes in episode 9.
Because whatever the case happens, Tom is consistently one of those characters that has a plan until he doesn't, and then it somehow like magically warps its way around when someone comes up to bat for him. I want to talk about Connor for a second, because Connor comes back in this episode for a brief second. They've been really having like an interesting journey with Connor this season, where they seem to definitely have more of a deliberate thing planned out for him, which is that every single instance, he actually seems to want to be more involved in the family now. Seemingly, he's asked Shiv for an executive job, then he asked Logan for one in this instance, and even to the point where he even shocks Logan where Logan's like, you've never once been interested in the company before. Why now? And he
Mhm.
starts pointing out all the reasons, rightfully so, why none of the other siblings are really qualified for it. But I don't know. It's definitely very interesting how he seems to be positioning himself, especially with his treatment towards Shiv. Obviously, first last season with asking her for the executive job and then completely undermining her. And then this episode being like, oh, well, I'm going to get an appointment with dad or else I'm going to leak all the stuff that I know. What is it? The
Mhm.
semen covered something of our family. And I'm like,
Yeah.
what is Connor? What is up with Connor? And where is this aggressive edge that coming from? Like, has he always had this? Obviously, there have been veiled references to the fact that like he may have been in on the abuse with Roman when they were kids, but like I don't know, man. Like Connor's up to something this season, whether he realizes or not. Because if there's one person that's more clueless than Tom, it's Connor. You know?
Oh yeah, for sure. For sure. I know I don't really have anything to add with that. I agree. Like Alan Ruck, he keeps getting more and more interesting and that performance is just great and I love that actor. So I can't wait. And he hinted at something in like after the episode they had the actors talk about the episode and he was like we might find out more about, his upbringing, being raised by his mother and like what Logan did to his mother.
Right.
So,
That's
like, he
true.
could bring that into like if he sets up his own press conference, a la Kendall style,
Ooh,
you
that would
know,
be crazy.
that maybe that could be the last thing of the episode of the finale of this season if Logan doesn't die.
Especially just given with the way that this episode ends and obviously with what's going to happen in next week's episode, it kind of shows like, could Connor be attempting to make another run for president? And could he maybe not have Waystar's best interests at heart, despite the fact that, on the surface, it would seem the best, obviously, a Roy in the most powerful seat in the world. And serving up his dad as president of Waystar could definitely be interesting. But
Mhm.
so we've been building all episodes, but so Connor's going to be interesting to watch. I think as we follow these, as we wrap up the season in these next 4 episodes. But let's talk about Shiv. We've been kind of circling around her all season. Shiv has constantly been even more indecisive than she has been before. She's finally gotten her dream. She's finally got a prominent seat in the company, but she's been upended, undermined, disrupted at every single chance we've gotten, whether it's by Logan or whether by the other Waystar employees, Carl and Frank, by Connor, by Roman. She's been criticized at every chance she gets. In this episode, ironically enough, she finally gets a win with her being the one to negotiate the final end-all, be-all saving deal with Sandy.
Mhm.
I like the back and forth kind of trade-off where it's like, where she throws Sandy's words back in her face with the let's go, I do what my dad tells me ultimately. Like, I don't know. What were your thoughts just on Shiv this episode?
Oh,
Do you think she
the,
improved drastically or
yeah, this was her strongest episode as a character, I would say. Absolutely. And that performance is still A1. Great. Perfect. But yeah, definitely her best episode. I didn't like that callback to that line. I didn't like that at all because it felt completely unnatural. But that's not the character or the actors. That's not the actor's fault. But yeah, I love her trajectory in this episode. The like how cool she kind of keeps it ultimately, even though at the end of the episode she gets an anvil thrown right on her by her father emotionally, even though she fucking saved the day from their end. And yeah, I loved her scenes with Hope Davis, and I loved I loved when she was realizing her dad was going piss mad, and she was like,
right?
she was slowly starting to unravel, like and get like have like a mini anxiety attack
Yeah.
between sentences. I feel like,
That's the other thing too, though, is
yeah,
that for these people to be in the position that they are, and for them to be as close and like, as like bowing to Logan, like literally Logan tells them to jump, they ask how high, like everything about these people's lives is dictated around Logan. And it takes them how long to realize that something is seriously wrong with him? Like they don't realize it like from the minute that he starts like kind of acting a little nuts. And then also for his assistant to be like, oh, he didn't take his pills. Like, what were you doing this entire time? You're his assistant. What were you doing? Like checking your phone, checking your emails, checking your Twitter? Like, come on, this
direct
is literally your
writing
job.
Wonder Woman
The
3.
the future of your entire company of your job is literally at stake here. Like,
Yeah.
what are you doing? And I don't know. I know that that's kind of a demonstration that, and part of the, the more satirical edges of the show with Jesse Armstrong wanted to kind of prove like kind of how it, that again, the people who are some of the most powerful people on the planet can just be super incompetent. He obviously brings that from his Veep days, but I don't know. Like there was just something that was a little off about that to me ultimately, but Shiv at the end of the day, after all this pressure that she's been under, is able to negotiate again a seemingly thing that actually does work for everyone. Where even 4-4, 2 Roys, both Sandys on the board. Also, even manages to throw in a little girl power moment. It didn't work on Sanaa Lathan, but it works for her and Hope Davis, where she's like, "Look, it can finally give us both, some more positions of power." And Hope Davis seems legitimately enthralled and legitimately interested in that, which could potentially show, okay, could something in the future happen between these pair? That's what I like, is that this episode in particular also seemingly dictates a lot of different interesting routes they could go for the future. Obviously, everything that's going on with Tom, Greg, if he becomes a little bit more vicious, Connor, if he does make another serious pull for president and actually starts to prove himself more of an enemy, Shiv and Sandy Jr. Ultimately, it just makes me wonder. I'm like, oh no, is there not going to be as much room for Kendall going forward? And what exactly is Kendall's future? Because Kendall's the only one that seems to like not really have anything positive for him looking up at the next moment. But I agree with you. This is definitely Shiv's strongest episode in a while. I was definitely really, really happy that we actually finally got to see her doing something that was actually like kind of, for lack of a better word, useful and beneficial to the company, and not just her being self-serving and her like kind of just like tripping over her own feet for her father's approval. The ironic thing is that this is like the first move that she's made in a while that didn't seem to be for her father's direct approval, because Logan was out of it for a majority of the episode. And of course, the minute that he finds out, oh shit, she did something without needing my help, that's when he turns on her. That's when That's when, the fires are lit, and that's when she ultimately, starts to feel his wrath. But now that she's negotiated this position, seemingly in a more savvy way than Kendall did, could this be a position for her to like work her way up and eventually push her dad out, do you think?
I don't know about that, but she definitely showed her potential in the company this episode for sure.
Yeah, well, it just always seems that like Shiv is always a little bit too self-serving for her own good. So I can't imagine. We obviously know that she never makes a move unless it benefits her directly. And that move with Sandy,
Yes.
it's like, yeah, there's a reason why that discussion went down with just the two of them, and not when there were like other people in the room, like not when Stewy was in the room. And yeah, the only other thing that I really have to talk about as far as this episode goes is kind of the Roman of it all, because Roman, once again, is kind of just playing reactionary once again to everyone until he gets his one big moment. Him and Jerry are once again having this back and forth. He like, Jerry is kind of, throwing him off, throwing, kind of opposition his way, kind of disregarding a lot of his stuff. And then at the end, when Logan is incapacitated, it's ultimately up to Roman to start to talk to the president. Yeah. And it is just wild how he goes about it. It's like, again, I still think that this season has been some of the best acting that Kieran Culkin has done on the entire show. And this one, where he has to kind of play this mix of like, talking his way around, the most powerful man talking his way around the most powerful man in the world, literally, and who they clearly installed there, and who may also have some sort of mental deficiency of his own. And it turns out that, like, in the biggest plot twist probably of the show yet, the Roy's, covering, political covering, due to the fact that the president will not back the investigation off of them, has resulted in him deciding to not seek a second term ultimately. So the Roy's, this is once again low-key an episode of like, wow, how these rich people like influence these major world events, because now we're going to be seeing potentially more of the political edge for the rest of the show. Does the show end with the kind of the succession equivalent of the 2020 election? Like, because they've definitely been pursuing a little bit more of a media edge, and we know that sometimes these shows don't necessarily end where we think that they're going to go. But like, the show is very clearly ignored COVID up until this point. But wouldn't it be interesting ultimately if this is kind of the point where they like start to breach into the real world?
Yeah, and what if we get Eric Bogosian's character back? That would be awesome.
That would be awesome indeed. The Gil Evers, although Bernie Sanders, never stood a chance of winning, so who knows where we'll go with that. But
no, yeah, I know he's playing a Bernie Sanders type, but like the left still won. Biden still won. So like, he's Gil Evers. He's not Joe Biden. He's not Bernie Sanders.
Bernie Sanders.
But yeah. Oh, but Roman's that scene with the president, him talking on the phone with the president was great. That
Yeah,
was
that
just
to me was
hilarious.
like Kieran Culkin's Emmy moment. Like Jeremy Strong, it's like the first 3 episodes, and this is both Sarah Snook and Kieran Culkin's Emmy episode for me personally. I just thought the performances they gave
Yeah,
were like so top tier. It was like kind of the peak of like where their characters had to go and what they had to deal with. Really, honestly, just top tier acting around this. I think is probably the best acted episode from everyone in front. Just a couple of quick gags that I wanted to point out. The commitment of the one guy to carrying out the dead cat when Logan was hallucinating
that
about
was
it.
great.
That was wild. That was I'm
Oh
like,
yeah,
wow.
what
Talk
is he
about commitment to a
doing?
bit.
Oh, that's he's
He's
carrying an
carrying out
imaginary
the
cat.
imaginary dead cat. And just Roman's commitment to the bit there was legendary. It was completely legendary.
That
I
was
also
great.
I also just love how oh man. Oh, I completely lost my train of thought there. But I think that ultimately kind of what this episode spells out is this is definitely going to potentially go into more realms. Ultimately, you obviously, you've been seeing them make this big tech push. Ultimately, we know that Alexander Skarsgård, who hasn't even been introduced yet, is the head of this tech conglomerate that's going to be, coming up. You're going to have, something going on in the next episode with some sort of like presidential cabinet. You don't know what the fallout of the Logan Shiv thing will be. Ultimately, we still don't even know what Jerry's kind of role is going to be going forward, because Jerry once again seems to have just been, playing mediator and playing, damage control once again, as she usually does. Like, I don't know, does Jerry still keep the number one CEO spot by the end of this season?
I don't know, but she's been doing a decent enough job. I feel like right now, where it's just like she could end up like, eh, you know, controlling Waystar in the end if Logan ends up dying at a certain point. Who knows? Like she's showing a lot of good potential, Jerry, and she's very strong-minded, and she took control of the stage when Frank gave her the mic, and she vamped, and she did good. So I love that performance, and that character has grown a lot more strong, and the writing for that character has been stronger as well. So I can't wait to see what they do with most of the characters, her in particular.
Absolutely. Yeah. So we're
Mhm.
getting near the final rung of the show. So before we wrap up tonight's episode, I just wanted to ask you. Obviously, we know, obviously, this episode was a crazy big episode as far as like, plot twists and at the last minute where we thought it was going to go versus where it ended up going. But like, where does the rest of the show go? Obviously, we still have to introduce Alexander Skarsgård. We have what's left of the presidential campaign. We have Greg seems to have picked a side or not. Tom is just one step further to the brink of insanity, as is Connor. Like, where do we go from here? Like, what even is like the future of this strange conflict that seems to have erupted here at Waystar?
Like I said, dude, I have no idea. I really don't. Like every episode just like gets more and more tense, more and more unpredictable. I really want Kendall to, regain momentum and make this a little bit more even more tense and unpredictable as it has been. And I love the shifting of levels, the playing field or whatever the phrase is. It's late. But yeah, I can't wait to see what Kendall is gonna retaliate with, or if he does anyway, or if Logan's gonna die, or if Roman can get it up, or if Alan Ruck can be president. Find out next week on Succession.
And that seems to be as good a spot as any to end the show. That was our recap of episode 5, season 3, Retired Janitors of Idaho for Succession. Let us know your thoughts in the comment section below.
Four and a half out of
four,
five for me.
I give this episode, 4.5 out of 5. This is my favorite episode easily of the season so far. And we haven't even gotten my boy Skarsgård yet. So let us know your thoughts in the comment section below. Be sure to keep tuning in every Thursday for the Succession recap show. We've got 4 episodes left. I can't believe it. We've only got a month and a half left of 2021. It's wild how fast this year went. I hope that 2022 is even better. Real quick question before we go. Do you think we get more Succession next year, or do you think they take another 2-year gap? I'm legitimately interested in that.
No, I think we're gonna get it again.
Nice.
I don't think they're gonna take a break.
That's awesome because that obviously after the gap year of COVID that gave everyone some time to catch up on it. I definitely think it would be a mistake to pull the plug now. I definitely think that they've got so much more going. Yeah, they've got 2 more seasons. Just give us 2 more seasons. Give it the full 5. Give it the full 5. That's what I say. There's very few shows that can make 4 seasons really work. I think the only 2 that have done it for me personally so far have been Good Place and Mr. Robot. Every other show that has done 4 seasons, I think, has felt, too short change. So I definitely think if they can pull it to 5, that'll be perfect territory. So that was it. That was this episode. Be sure to click the subscribe button, click the bell next to it. That way you guys get notified every time we put up new content. Be sure to follow us on the Facebook and Instagram at Talkin TV Podcast. Dustin, where can the good people find you?
They can find me on youtube.com/Mr. G Movie Reviews. They can find me on Letterboxd, Dustin Mason, and they can find me on Twitter, Duster.
Of course, you can follow me at Movie Nerd Reviews on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. And as always, people, remember 12 seasons in a short film and watch more fucking movies. We'll be back next week for episode 6. See ya.